Hello, I'm Robert Ellsberg. I'm the publisher of Orbis Books. And I'm very glad to be joined today by one of our really eminent authors. He has published 4 or 5 books, all with Orbis, I'm glad to say. And we'll be talking today with Steve Bevans about his new book, Community of Missionary Disciples, The Continuing Creation of the Church. Um, Steve Bevans is a priest and member of the Society of the Divine Word, uh, Missionary Society. He is professor emeritus of mission and culture at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. His many books, which, as I mentioned, are published by Orbis Books, include Models of Contextual Theology, Introduction to Theology in Global Perspective, and with Roger Schroeder, a real classic, Constance in Context, a Theology of Mission for Today. His new book has really been described as a magnum opus. You can see it's a pretty big book. He writes big books, 450 pages or so, but it's the fruit of decades of work, but also a book that could have been just sort of written for today, because it takes off so much from the new kind of missionary language and impulse that Pope Francis has given to the church, which is reflected in the very title itself, A Community of Missionary Disciples, a phrase that Pope Francis likes to use. And in the first sentence, Steve, you say, this book is an attempt to develop a theology of the church that is thoroughly missionary. You go on to explain what that means. But in effect, you're saying that it's an ecclesiology written in a missionary key. And anyone who reads your book will ask themselves, why hasn't this been done before? Why isn't all ecclesiology written in a missionary key? Maybe you could just begin with that and explain what it is you're trying to do with this book, and why mission and ecclesiology go together so importantly.
Sure. I think why isn't all ecclesiology missionary? I think that before Vatican II, of course, the big thing was the church as a society, as an institution, and so forth. You're trying to show that and prove that. And I remember reading, years ago in these old manuals, the church is essentially monarchical and hierarchical.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the emphasis there. Then I think the shift in Vatican II went from institution to community.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, was a great move, the move to the people of God. That was a really great move. But it's interesting that I think what a lot of people missed in Vatican II was the red thread of the missionary nature of the church. It's most clearly said in the document on mission, paragraph 2, the church is missionary by its very nature because it participates in the life of the missionary life of the Trinity. But that was like one of the last documents approved. They wanted to have that document. It almost didn't happen, but some bishops came out and said, well, look, in Lumen Gentium, in the document on the church, if you look carefully, the missionary nature is there. But somehow or another, that was lost in the interpretations of Vatican II. And that great line, which I remember reading, as a young theologian teaching in the Philippines, which, like, oh my gosh, what it meant was, not that the church will always have a mission, but that mission actually is constitutive of what the church is about. If the church if the church were not in mission, there wouldn't be a church. So that's how the thing developed. I think it's something in many ways people recognize, but mission was always like the last chapter in the book.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to say was, no, it's a lens
Mm-hmm.
through which we read the whole nature of the church, the whole reality of the church. And it really, really makes a difference, I think, because what it does is then it moves into saying that the church is never really founded once and for all. The church is always, because it's moving into new contexts and new places and new languages and new eras and all that stuff, it always is being created by the Spirit of Jesus, of course, you know. So I say Jesus is the foundation of the church, and the Spirit is constantly leading the church to create it in particular situations. And you know, that's you know, earth-shaking, really, you know. And if we really got that, which I think Francis gets, you know, then, you know, we can move into this new way of seeing the church as constantly changing and developing. And we're not caught in this kind of Platonic or Hellenistic idea that, you know, what is true never changes. So I hope that answers the
No, that's
question.
very much, and I have to say, even after reading the book, I was surprised to go back and see the subtitle of the book, The Continuing Creation of the Church, which I had not really realized that is a kind of description. I think that one of the issues, maybe you agree, that why people sort of put mission off to the side as, oh, that's a nice thing that the church does, because they think that it's one of the things the church does, and they associate it with the great kind of era of missionary expansion, which also has colonial implications. And they think that's sort of an anachronistic kind of thing. And now, or they think that mission is what professional missionaries do. And you belong to a missionary society. I work for a missionary society, Maryknoll. I think, well, that's for the missionaries do that. But your idea then of the mission of the church as being the kind of life of the church in the world, continuing the mission of Jesus, continuing the mission of God, and it's the kind of constant life and encounter with people, with new situations, with unfolding contexts, with history, etc. Challenges that we haven't been able to anticipate before.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right. That mission isn't this exotic thing, you know. It's simply what the church is in the world. It's the church exists for the reign of God, which is the transformation of the world. And you know, yes, it has, you know, the how do you say, the foreign mission aspect, going to the ends of the earth and so forth, but it also is everywhere that the church finds itself. And I think that's extremely important to recognize, and that's the insight of which I wrote the book. You know,
well, John Paul II also, made it clear that proclamation, which is what a lot of people think is what mission is about, preaching the word, evangelization in that sense, is what mission is about, and he went through all these different kind of aspects of witness and dialogue, and commitment to social justice and social promotion, of interreligious dialogue. All those are aspects of mission. Do you think that sometimes that talking to people, young people today, that the word mission needs to be retired, or we can revive it and give it a meaning that seems not so much tied to stereotypes from the past?
I mean, there's a lot of talk about that. And I mean, even I was just at the American Society of Missiology a couple of weeks ago, and they're saying, oh, maybe we need to think, use a different term for mission. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you'd use. I mean, you could use evangelization, but then that has, the proclamation kind of aspect to it. Whereas mission, I think, is it's this multifaceted kind of reality that Paul VI and John Paul II, and of course Francis, talks about. So I don't know. I think the best thing to do would be, I always try to defend it and say we just have to revitalize it. But it is. I mean, I remember one time Peter Fahn was at CTU where I taught for many years, and he was saying, mission is not an innocent word, and it's not. And I think, but we do have to, it's like it's what we have, and it's actually originally meant for about the nature of God, the missions of the Trinity, like in the Summa Theologiae and other classic texts, and then somehow or another, especially after the Council of Trent, the Jesuits particularly began to talk about, the different missions that they would, undertake in Europe or, in Asia or wherever. And then it became this idea of, not somehow participating in the very nature of God, but rather the church going places and trying to plant itself or save souls or something like that, which is all kind of valid and all, but nevertheless, it got kind of distorted.
You repeat a line that Mary Nollers like to use a lot too, which is that the church does not have a mission. Mission has a church.
Yeah, right, yeah. It's a great line. I mean, I first saw it in actually kind of said by the Africanist Adrian Hastings way back. It's in the and actually it was in an article by Roger Haight back in the 1974 or something like that. That kind of idea has caught on. Yeah, it's the church doesn't have a mission. The mission of God has a church. That's the key thing.
What are some of the ways that you think Pope Francis has kind of done a kind of reset on this relation, this kind of missionary ecclesiology?
Well, I think that his reappropriation of the idea of the people of God is a big thing, and that kind of ties into his understandings of synodality, which ultimately is something to help focus the mission of the church out of the participation of the whole church, not just the leadership of the church. I think, some of his ideas like culture of encounter, these are all kind of missionary notions, which he has used, and his getting away from a high clericalism in the church, things like that. One of the things that Roger and I are working on a book. Unfortunately, it's not going to be for Orbis, but it's a book on another phrase of Francis, which is, the church doesn't grow by proselytism; it grows by attraction. And so Francis is always trying to make the church more attractive, Christianity more attractive. And I've been doing some research in that, and I think that even goes back to, John the 23rd in his opening speech at Vatican II, where he talks about how, it's the gospel itself that has to persuade people. It's the power of the gospel itself, but we have somehow obscured it with, all sorts of rules and regulations and hierarchies and things like that.
Gandhi, who had, great admiration for Jesus and the gospel, but was very critical of missionaries of his time. And he talked of the mission of a rose that attracts people by its beauty and its aroma. It
Yeah.
doesn't go around trying to clobber people over the head.
Yes. Yes.
Why they should become roses or something like that.
Yeah. That's great. What did you say? The mission of a rose? Is
Yeah,
that
like a rose, like flower,
like a rose? Oh yeah. That's wonderful. I've never heard that before. That's really great. But
Yeah.
it's that idea. Yeah, exactly. Because I think those of us who know and have faith and participate in the church, I mean, we know how rich, the tradition can be, and the church can be, and faith in Christ can be, and somehow or another we get caught up in these other things, and it really obscures the truth, the joy of the gospel.
Well, that idea that, they'll know we are Christians by our love,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
what do they know us as, actually by our actual behavior. And
yeah, exactly,
many people
exactly,
associate Christianity with intolerance and,
exactly.
you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
rigidity, doctrine,
yeah.
whatever. Well, it's interesting that, Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium, his first great apostolic exhortation,
Right. Yeah,
he really talks about kind of putting mission first and foremost. He says
yes,
every kind of reform of the church, every sort of renewal is
yeah,
for the sake of mission. It should be
yeah,
measured
yeah.
against that and not against anything else.
Right.
So what does he what does this mean? A community of missionary disciples. So as a model of the church. And incidentally, I was going to think, that Avery Dulles wrote the famous book Models of the Church,
Right.
and he
Hmm.
laid out, there's institutional model and there's a herald and there's a servant and all these kind of things. And
Hmm.
he did have then added a model later on a
Right.
community of disciples or something like that,
Right.
didn't he? But
Right.
not missionary disciples. He didn't get that. No,
Not
maybe it's
missionary
implied.
disciples. Yeah.
So if is this a new model or what?
Well, I mean, I think it is. I think it is. If in the book, when I talk about the church as a community of missionary disciples, I actually go back to Dulles
Hmm.
and talk about his sixth model. The
Hmm.
community which he saw that's really the best one. And he mentions in there that it does capture the mission of the church, and so it captures all, he thinks, of the other five models of the church. And But I think, Francis, um, I think Vatican II, as I said before, had this great shift to community and
Hmm.
people of God, and that was so important. But then, the church doesn't exist for itself,
Yeah, right, exactly.
and
Yeah.
that's the missionary
Hmm.
aspect. So we get caught up in that, and it's really important to have a good community and to have a prophetic community and so forth. But the church exists, in order to change the world,
Mm-hmm.
or at least to maybe put it this way, in order to work with God in changing the world.
Right.
Uh, and as what Pope Francis, in that wonderful line in Evangelii Gaudium, where he says, I have this dream of a missionary church where everything in the church, its times and schedules and structures and everything else, is not about the church, just trying to preserve itself,
Mm-hmm.
but rather looking at the evangelization of the world. And that's, I think, the key thing here, is that so often I think we have focused on the church itself,
Mm-hmm.
and rather than well, I think things like, in the Amazonian Pan-Amazonian Synod,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
when they said, we want to have, women deacons, we want to have married men ordained priests, we want to have Amazonian liturgical rite, all those kinds of things. The reason is not for the church.
Mhm.
The reason is for the mission of the church. So that one of the phrases I use in my book is in the third section is structure serves mission,
Mm.
vice versa.
Mhm.
So the structures of the church, which we are so often concerned about when we're focusing on the church itself, mission begins to serve structure rather than the other way around. And that's why I think the missionary dimension of it, the centrifugal understanding of the church, has so much importance to change the way we think about the church.
Mm. Mm. Well, I think of Pope Francis, kind of introduced himself to the church when he spoke at the conclave where he was elected Pope. And he
Yeah.
got up and just spoke for 5 minutes with just a few little notes. And it kind of was this moment. And they
Yeah.
decided, hey, he's going to be the Pope. And
That's
he
right.
talked about exactly this, the greatest danger facing the church is self-referentiality
Yes.
and a
Yes.
kind of institutional ecclesial introversion,
Yes.
as if
Yeah.
the church exists for itself and its self-preservation. He
Exactly.
said, I rather than an evangelizing church that goes out to the margins and the peripheries,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the idea that that's not to churchify, the world,
No.
but
No.
to make the values of God's reign more evident, more reconciliation and love and mercy and community and
Yeah.
transformation.
Exactly.
Care for the planet. He's emphasized that as well. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, and you see this kind of switch from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, kind of the emphasis on doctrinal
Right.
orthodoxy as being
Yeah.
the engine that drives the church toward evangelization.
Yeah.
This also, though, has implications for, as you develop, again, for this idea that mission is not just the work of missionaries,
Right.
or unless you say that all Christians are missionary disciples,
Yeah.
that we're all called to mission, and we're not just called to go to church on Sunday.
Right.
The whole thrust of the Eucharist and of Mass is to be sent, is to go
Right.
out into the world. Uh,
Right.
so that it really represents a kind of a new mission age for the church, doesn't it?
I think it does. I mean, if we can, if synodality could actually take in the church, and even maybe not 100%, but maybe 20%, I think it would change the way people would be responsible. They would see themselves as witnesses in their daily lives, and hopefully would be interested in learning more about their faith so that they could do that, and then they'd be able to not only witness but somehow articulate to people the joy that they find, the depth that they find in faith. I think it really makes a difference. And I think if the clergy or the ministers in the church, let's say, I mean, including the clergy, of course, but if they would recognize the fact that all Christians are called to be baptismal missionary disciples, then they could work at somehow forming them in this type of way. I mean, it's very ideal, I know, but I think that's the kind of theology that we have to have, whereas as I say, the structure of the church, the ministry of the church, and so forth serves the mission of the church.
Well, let me just end by asking you to expand a little bit on a line that is actually the last line in the book.
Yeah.
You're quoting somebody else, but church is a verb.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I think what it means is that the church is not about sitting around and looking at itself, and it's about getting out there, getting out in the world, and and uh, Paul VI has this wonderful line in his discourse at the end of the Vatican II, and he says, you know, we have to seek the world. We have to, as it were, almost run after the world, you know, with the good news of the gospel, and also to see God present in the world in that way as well. And so, I mean, I think that's what it means, is that the church is not just a static reality, but it's a pilgrim people that are on their way together toward the reign of God. You know, that's how I say I love that poem that opens the book, and it's the last line. Don't be fooled. Church is a verb. You know,
In
so
continuing creation. And
yeah,
so
exactly.
I want to thank you very much, Steve, for talking about this really fantastic and important book, Community of Missionary Disciples from Orbis Books.
Thank you, Robert.
Or your next book won't be with us, but I'm sure there'll be more after that. I look forward to them.